Okay, guys, so good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, again in Canada and again in Alberta, and my first time here in Lethbridge. So it's just great. Well, I'm going to talk about today Brazilian agriculture with emphasis in soil fertility management. And before anything else, I would like to uh, show my appreciation to the event, Farming Smarter, for inviting me, and to my good friend, Thomas Jensen. We worked together at the International Fertilizer Development Center, and just great guy, great professor, great friend. And Jamie, where's Jamie? She is somewhere. Oh, there she is. Thank you very much, Jamie, because she was the one that took care of all the logistics for me to be here. And also, I would like to recognize Andre, that is sitting there, and Jenny for their time, because I asked Jamie if I could speak with some farmers to understand a little bit better about the region. And so we had online meetings. So thank you very much. Anyway, I always show this video and I say, well, if I had obligation to show just one slide, I would do a recognition to farmers. There's so much misleading information about farming and farmers nowadays. So I'm going to show this video. It's a video that was produced by a company, so I don't have any relation with this company, but I just thought the video is great. So I'm going to play it. You know, people, they live in big cities and every day they sit down and eat their meals like rice, potatoes, beef, salad. And sometimes they blame farmers and farming. And this is just so unfair. So anyway, this is my recognition to all of you that farm. Congratulations. Okay, some initial remarks. Please note, not everything here that I will say can be directly applied to your conditions. Maybe most things do not apply. But I was invited to speak about Brazilian agriculture and soil fertility management there. So I hope something is useful for you. I divided my presentation in 4 sections. First of all, I'm going to talk about evidence-based agriculture, then some facts about Brazilian agriculture, followed by soil fertility management, and some final thoughts. There's no time to explore, of course, everything I would like, but I will be around today, okay? So I'll be all day here. You can look for me and we can talk. First of all, evidence-based agriculture. Why do I like to talk about this? I always try to put myself on the shoes of farmers, and there are so many options being offered to farmers nowadays in terms of products and techniques. And I wonder, how do they recognize and make a decision what is good from what is bad, right? So as a researcher, everywhere I go in Brazil and all over the world, people ask, does it work? And I have to tell you, the quality of information shown by many as a proof it works are very weak, incomplete, and misleading. So I have the objective here to, among other things, to alert you for what is science versus what's pseudoscience. I'm going to show a slide about this. Charles Darwin already said, it's amazing. Ignorance more frequently leads to more confidence than does knowledge. It's so impressive. And nowadays, this is so true. And this picture here shows it very well, right? You have an answer that's simple but wrong, but people like it. And you have another one which is complex but right, and people don't follow it. So, and the next one is, I saw the other day in social media, and I thought it was so funny because, Tom, there are so many fake news around nowadays. It's hard to what we believe and what we don't, what is true from what's not. But there are some things that are proving to be correct, and this illustrates very well this situation. So it's about we need to believe in the correct evidences. So here is a teacher, right, in the old times, talking about the Pythagoras theorem, right, which says the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of squares of the other two sides, right? So everybody knows that. It's proving. But nowadays, if a teacher tells this to his class, it's very possible someone is going to say fake numbers. Others will say it's a right angle conspiracy. Maybe some say that's what they want us to believe. So I don't believe in that. Or don't tell me what to think. That's very funny. Or I'm entitled to my own opinion. So anyway, it's crazy nowadays. It's just crazy. But we have to follow what science and knowledge says. So this is the most important slide from this part, because I'm trying to differentiate what is science from what's pseudoscience. Science is willing to change opinions with new evidence. Pseudoscience has fixed ideas. Science, the information is based in peer-reviewed. Pseudoscience is no peer-reviewed. Science considers all information. Pseudoscience, selective presentation of favorable information. Don't be misled by the fact that many industries repeat their experiments 30 times and just show you the one or the two that worked in their favor. Science invites to criticism, and pseudoscience is criticism as conspiracy. Science, verifiable results. Pseudoscience, no repeatable results. Limits claims of usefulness. Pseudoscience claims widespread usefulness. So when you see someone say, no, it works everywhere, it works in all conditions, oh, that's a good step for you not to believe it. And science is accurate measurements and recognized methods. Pseudoscience, ballpark measurements, and uncertain methods. So we have a procedure for science, okay, and we have to follow. And I always am quoting here a very, very famous economist, Mr. Keynes. Maybe you heard about him. He changed the macroeconomy in the world. And one time, he had an opinion. And then later on, Months later, he changed his opinion, and a journalist, Tom, was challenging him, say, hey, you changed your opinion. And he said, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? So if science tells you that something is different, you got to believe it. So science is based on evidence that comes from reference treatments with controls, replicated, randomized, repeatable, reasonable, reported, refereed. I have a speech, a long speech about agriculture based in evidence. I just summarized some slides here. So test it yourself. Be skeptical. As a farmer, it's your dollars, and as an advisor, it is your reputation. Ask, how do you know that? So I want to tell you, yesterday we talked a little bit about innovation. I don't remember which speech was that. I was going to make this comment, but I said, as I have time tomorrow, so I'll talk about innovation in my speech. I want to give you an example about what happens in some cases in Brazil, and I'm illustrating from the co-op Agraria. By the way, Jamie, this is the one that you will visit. Jamie, and she's organizing a trip to Brazil, and I'll help her gladly. And this co-op is very, very responsible, very serious. So if you go to this co-op, they grow many crops. They are also food processing. So what happens? What happens if someone goes to the co-op farmer, a farmer, in his house, offering some innovation? What the farmer is going to tell him? The farmer is going to tell him, sir or lady, you came to the wrong place. You need to go to FAPA. FAPA is the Co-op Research Center. They will test it. When they tell me that is valid, I'm going to use it. And I always say this because that's what farmers, in my opinion, need to do. And that's what I understand Farming Smarter does. Congratulations for that. Because that's the way to go. So just to close this first session, I want to leave you with two thoughts. It's already a reality. The first one, it's from Alvin Toffler, that said the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those that cannot read and write, but those that cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And this is so true. I don't know if you're following what's going on with artificial intelligence. I have been studying this. It's scary. It may be good in some aspects. In others, it's very scary. And but anyway, we'll have to relearn. And then, I don't know if you read or already watched the interviews of this brilliant human being, Yuval Harari. He wrote *Sapiens*. Maybe some of you already heard about this book. Homo Deus. And when asked about the most important quality to succeed in the future, he's very straightforward. It will be the capacity to adapt to changes. And I agree so much with that. So we'll need always robust evidences. With that, let's go to the second part of my talk, which is some facts about Brazilian agriculture. Well, Brazil is very well positioned in terms of farming. We have the soil. We can still incorporate to our production system 100 million hectares of new land. We have 107 million hectares of pasture land degraded that we can convert to efficient agriculture. We have the climate, so almost everywhere is more than 1,200 millimeters a year. Excellent solar radiation. We have 25% of the available water in the world. We have the labor, and we have the research. We have very good research, agronomic research in Brazil. Yesterday, when the speaker that talked about the last one, the lady, what's her name? Siama? Well, anyway, she said, oh, I have been reading about crop rotation, and I read a lot from Germany. That's very true, I understand, because the problem is that Brazilians don't publish too much in English. But we have a lot of research on soil fertility and crop rotation, unfortunately not published in English. So we have good research. So it's incredible evolution in agriculture in late decades, highly efficient, great agronomic research. As I said, unfortunately, still little published in English. And very importantly, although you see the opposite in the media, Brazil is a great example of doing things in agriculture in accordance with high environmental standards. And I would highlight two great achievements in Brazil. One was the expansion to the savanna, and the second, of course, was the change to no-till. So here's a map of Brazil, and this dark green is what we call the savanna, the cerrado, and this is where the action took place in the late decades. In late 70s, you had nothing, and then people started to migrate and build agriculture there. And the soils there, very acidic, pH 4.2, 4.4, completely opposite than your soils, with very low nutrient availability. And a survey showed 80% of the soils here in the Cerrado with P deficiency. So very, very low fertility soils. So in my opinion, to summarize, what was responsible for the development and the good agriculture we have nowadays in the Cerrado was proper soil fertility management, very important breeding programs, and mechanization. So this was possible with that to change from this scenario to this scenario here. Very low soil fertility, aluminum toxicity. You can see the trees twisted, and this is aluminum toxicity. So from here to here. Now, this is kind of amazing. I want you to pay close attention to this. In 1984-85, Brazil produced 57 million tons of grain, 2,100 million, 14-15, 200 million, 22-23, more than 300 million tons of grain. Now, I heard this. When you tell this data, people get impressed, but it's amazing how some people have the capacity to say something that then you really have the dimension what this means. And this guy is Roberto Rodrigues, our former Ministry of Agriculture, in an event last year. And what he said is, here is Brazil, okay? Here's Manaus in the north, and here is Porto Alegre. And here you have about 4,500 kilometers long, which is about the same of, I'm not sure you can see, but here's Canada. And from Vancouver to Montreal, it's about 4,500 kilometers. So why I'm saying this? I'm saying this because what does it mean? What does it mean to increase grain production in 100 million tons of grain? Ladies and gentlemen, it means a train or a line of trucks from Vancouver to Montreal fill it with grains 15 times. That's 100 million tons of grains, right? So it's not an easy task. And we went from 57 million to more than 300 million. And regarding legislation for the environment, it's impressive. Not many countries in the world have a legislation where farmers have to save. It doesn't matter where you are. If you are a farmer, if you own land, you have to save 20% of your land in natural forests. 20%, imagine that. Now, of course the legislation was passed years ago. If the farmer doesn't have, because of course the legislation was different, he needs to buy land. So in total, 20% of his total land is natural forest. And amazing, in the Amazon forest, they have to save 80%. I'm saying 80. But all over the world, people say, Brazil, soybean, don't protect the environment, and blah, blah, blah. But media doesn't tell you this. Now, what are some challenges, in my opinion, for Brazilian agriculture? We have a lot of pressure of weeds, pests, and disease. You imagine in tropical conditions, right? It's crazy. And people say, the environmentalists say, oh, Brazil is the country that uses more pesticides in the world. But we are a big country. And if you do the math, how much you use by hectare, we are far from being the first. Also, pressure from environmentalists. Some fair, most unfair. Climatic changes, of course, it's a challenge. Another problem we have is soil compaction, because we have clay 1-to-1, have machinery, large farms, and compaction is taking place widely. Of course, we are always challenged by commodity price. As someone said yesterday, we are price takers, not price makers. And of course, I'm talking about Brazil, I'm not talking about Canada, but our politicians, and it doesn't matter. Nowadays, right and left, both are terrible. In fact, I think we as human beings, we need to come up with a new system of government. I mean, what's going on in the world is just terrible. But we are not here to discuss that. So, some general properties of Brazilian soils. So we are in the tropical condition, high levels of rain, as I said. The problem with rain is the distribution. I'll show you a graph of distribution of rain, okay? So this is the problem. Temperatures are high. As I said, now we have 35, 36 where I live. We have good topography. This is a plus for us. Now, the soil mineralogy is oxidate, or 1-to-1. You have 2-to-1. We have 1-to-1. pH is 90% of the time lower than 5. Base saturation is very low. Organic matter, yesterday I was telling some friends about this, is lower than 1.5, so it's very low. And the cation exchange capacity, this is another thing that people were amazed, is generally below 4, 5. So if you have 10, you are worried. So our cation exchange capacity is very low. Very low amounts of available nutrients, most especially nitrogen and phosphorus. And because of our soil type, very high P fixation. So what are the consequences or needs related to these conditions? No-till was a blessing for us. Liming most all the time. Soil profile amelioration, and I'm going to talk about this later. High amounts of nutrients used, Nutrient utilized in larger amounts is phosphorus because of P fixation. Very large farms, intense mechanization, a need for very good management of weeds, diseases, and pests, and more than one crop a year. We have places in Brazil you have 3 crops a year. That's a big plus for us. In fact, before in the Cerrado, they had just soybean and then some millet, but then they adapted the varieties for short-term soybean, so you can have corn in sequence. So this is very common. Well, this figure here is not so clear, the image, and I don't think you can see from the back, but I'm going to tell you what it is. Since IPNI, Tom, we have been doing the nutrient budget for Brazilian agriculture. We continue to do it. And in the last 4 years, the budget was for about 50% of the nitrogen, 50% of P2O5, and 72% for K. So what this means? It means how much phosphorus is exported as related to how much was applied. And 50% for nitrogen is low. 50% for phosphorus is not bad, is much better than other countries. And 72% for potassium is pretty good. So we are not there. It's not ideal, but it's not so bad. It's pretty good, in fact, compared to other countries. Okay, now let's talk about soil fertility management. Most of the time now will be on this topic. First of all, Brazil was very clever to establish a research program on soil fertility evaluation and control back in the 70s through the universities and through Embrapa. Top research, very good. I travel all over the world and I try to look from outside, and I can tell you the Brazilian research in agronomy is excellent. Region-specific studies on correlation, calibration, and response curves. And so very reliable soil fertility evaluation and fertilization. So 2 examples from these studies. Example number 1, innovative procedures of soil analysis by the ion exchange resin or remaining P. So we had a researcher, he traveled all over the world studying methodologies, and he saw this ion exchange resin, and he said, this is very promising, so we studied it for decades, and now we use it, and it's just excellent. I'm going to show one slide later. And the second one is there are several publications and models for recommending fertilizers throughout the country. Each region has its own publication and model. Okay, so this is about the resin. If you think, very briefly, if you think about what happens with phosphorus, how plants absorb phosphorus. Okay, they absorb phosphorus through the root. The concentration of phosphorus decreases in soil solution, and then phosphorus from the soil comes to the solution to the extent that it's possible. Now, when you apply a methodology, Bray, Olsen, Kurtz, or whatever, it's very instant, right? I mean, you shake it for 10 minutes, half an hour, and then you measure it. The resin is different. The resin, you have water, you have the resin, and you have the soil, and you shake for 16 hours. So what happens is the method, or what happens is very similar to what happens with the roots. The resin absorbs phosphorus, decreases the concentration in soil solution, and what's possible to come out comes out, and then the resin picks it up. And the resin is used for phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, can be used also for sulfur. And so it's a great methodology. Now let's talk a little bit about correlation, calibration, and response curve. Correlation is the study that will tell you what methodology is best for my soils, for my region. Calibration it's the interpretation, what the numbers mean for the plants. And response curves is, okay, now I know that this amount of potassium is low, so the next question is, how much do I apply for maize? This is answered by response curves. So this is a study on correlation. You see the methodology melic and resin, and you can see a much better correlation between soil P and how much P was absorbed by the plants with resin than melic. So studies like this were done in Brazil extensively and showed that resin was the best extractor for us. Then you go to calibration. Calibration, then, you know the methodology. Then you want to know what is very low, what's medium, high, and very high. Then you do studies in the field. So we consider very low from 0 to 50% of the maximum yield, low from 50 to 90, medium from 90 to 100, and then high and very high. So when you say this amount of potassium is low, it means that the probability, if you have our other limiting factors out of the way, but you don't correct the potassium, your yield is going to be between 50 and 90%. Then, here's just an example of calibration study for cotton, sugarcane, and beans. Okay, so this is real data. So as you increase the amount, the relative yield increases. And then you have the response curves, where you do in the field, you apply, for example, kilograms of P2O5 per hectare, and you measure the yield increase. And based on the curve, the model, you define how much I apply of P2O5 for soils that are very low, low, or medium in phosphorus. So this is a long process, okay? And we keep updating. It's difficult to update as the new varieties come up, but just in 2022, a new booklet for the state I live was released, an updated version. So finally, we have a model, or we have a chart that based on the yield and based on the level of phosphorus and potassium, you define how much P2O5, how much K2O you are going to apply, okay? So we did that extensively in Brazil. Now, in learning and talking with Jenny, with Andre, and they sent me some methodology that you use here, I got concerned with one thing, because Tom told me, of course your soils have high soil pH, right? But Tom, he did some work that in some areas, the pH is going down. And when I read that some, I don't know if it is the case here, but I read some use the Olsen test, it called my attention to tell you that you use diverse methodologies. It seems some use the Olsen test. Olsen was developed for soils with pH above 7. Very famous professor from Iowa State University, Mallarino. The Olsen test is more reliable for calcareous soils. Olsen solution is bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate, pH 8.7. Be very careful to use Olsen as the soil becomes acidic. Okay, so this is just kind of an advice if someone uses the Olsen test. Okay, so to end this part, let me tell you about precision and accuracy. Okay, so people get confused about the two. And so I have this, you should have this game here, right? Playing darts. So analogy is, this guy here was very precise, right? He always threw the dart in the same place, but very low accuracy. He's very far from his target. Now, this one It's low precision because it's scattered around reasonable accuracy. But what you want to do is really to have high precision and high accuracy. So I'm saying this because don't be misled. Sometimes you have high precision, but it's completely out of the target. Okay, so as you think about your soil analysis methodology, think about that. Okay, number 2, regarding soil fertility management in Brazil, we follow the good practice for 4R nutrient management, which I think you heard about it. That means the 4 principles to guide fertilizer use is you have to select the right source, applying the right rate, in the right place, and the right time. As you think about your fertilizer recommendation in your farm, you have to think about this, and you have to follow your advisor, your consultant, regarding what is the best source, what is the best rate, right place, and right time. Now, liming. I will spend some time in liming here, okay? Because as Tom said, some of the soil, not many, I guess, but some are getting acidic. As you move on doing farming, your soils will get acidic because you apply nitrogen, and nitrogen acidifies the soil. So Brazilian soils are very acidic. Liming is necessary. Most convenient soil pH for crop growth generally leads to higher nutrient use efficiency, as this chart shows. Okay, here's pH, and here is availability of nutrients. And you have, for example, iron, manganese, zinc. As the pH increases, the availability decreases, and you have the same thing for other nutrients. And one thing that got my attention is that people keep saying that even in this high soil pH soils you don't have problems with micronutrient availability. It's possible, it's a different soil, but it's kind of strange because in high pH soils, micronutrients like zinc tend to precipitate. So take a look. I heard someone told me boron is becoming an issue. I will talk a little bit about this later. Okay, so here's just many experiments, but I'm highlighting one of them with soybean mococa, and the liming took place in different rates. So the soil originally had pH 4.3, and it was increased to 6.4, and you can see the foliar concentration of phosphorus increased. So showing that as you increase soil pH, you have better absorption of phosphorus. Now, let me spend some time explaining to you the methodology we use to define how much lime we apply. So first of all, we have to understand the principle. And I like this figure very much. You know, you can think of the soil as a container, as a reservoir, and then you have your cation exchange capacity. And inside this cation exchange capacity, you can have cations like calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, aluminum, and hydrogen, right? And there is an equilibrium between this and soil pH. As you decrease hydrogen and you increase calcium, magnesium, and potassium, pH increases. So pH is a reflection of this situation here. And a very useful concept is base saturation, which means how much of potassium, calcium, magnesium, and in some soil sodium we have in the reservoir as related to the cation exchange capacity. Okay? So our base saturation is like 20, 25%. So if it's 20, what is the other 80? It's hydrogen and aluminum. Very acidic soils, okay? Now, we did some tests and we concluded there is a very good relation in our soils between pH and base saturation. You can see here. As you increase the pH, you increase base saturation. And we did a lot of agronomic trials in terms of a response curve. What's the relative yield as related to the base saturation? And for each crop, we found which is the ideal base saturation. And so to summarize everything, knowing base saturation, there is a good correlation between pH and base saturation. Response curves for each crop in terms of base saturation. We calculate the amount of lime. I don't have time to explain in detail this formula. It's not the case, but it's very clever, in my opinion. The amount of lime is base saturation 2 minus base saturation 1 times the cation exchange capacity divided by the calcium carbonate equivalent of the lime. So all that this is doing is, okay, I have base saturation 20, but for maize, the ideal is 70. So how much I have to apply to go from 20 to 70? That's what this does, and it has been working very, very well for us. You understand that? Is that clear? If it's not, look for me, okay, in the coffee break. Okay, now the other one, which applies very well for, can I have some water, please, if you don't mind? Yeah, please. The other one is soil profile amelioration, because, you know, we need more roots, right? We look to the plants just above the ground, but we need to look to the roots. Thank you. Thank you very much. And here's what we have in a lot of places in Brazil. Why is it so important to decrease subsoil acidity? So you have months, you have precipitation, you have temperature, you have evapotranspiration. You can see that from April, May to September, we have no rain. So if you want to have 2 crops a year, you need to start early, okay? So we have soybean going from late September, early October to January, because we still have rain. Then you start your corn in the same area. You get some rain, get it going, because you will not have rain after April. But if you have roots down in the soil profile, the water finishes first in the topsoil. So if you have roots down there, it's better chance for the plants. And that's the whole thing of we need to have roots down the soil profile. And what prevents roots from going down to the soil profile? Many things, but especially soil compaction, low exchangeable calcium, high exchangeable aluminum, or low available P. And so we have been working a lot to ameliorate the soil profile so the roots can go down and absorb more water and more nutrients. And here is, I'm just showing some chemistry. We have been using a lot of gypsum or phosphogypsum. So I want to show you the difference between calcium carbonate and calcium sulfate. Gypsum is calcium sulfate, okay? So this is what we have in our soils. I mean, they are acidic, very high aluminum, very low calcium in the topsoil, and also down below. This is different from you. When you apply lime, lime is very insoluble. You can decrease aluminum, increase calcium in the topsoil, but lime does not go down in the profile. But when you use calcium sulfate, because calcium sulfate is much more soluble, it forms ion pairs. Calcium sulfate, potassium sulfate goes down in the soil profile and decreases aluminum and increases calcium. And when you do that, roots say, you know, no aluminum here, good calcium, I'm going down. And that's what happens. Many, many experiments showing that. So we use a lot of phosphogypsum, which is a byproduct in the production of phosphoric acid. It's a problem for the industry, in fact. So we use it in our benefit, and here it's kind of slow. Here it's for several crops, several experiments. Believe me, you can have my presentation, okay? No problem. You can look at the data. No, it's work. Okay, so more roots for different crops when you apply gypsum as related to when you don't apply gypsum. Okay, moving on. Increasing the offer of reliable and cost-effective pea fertilizers and fertilizers in general. We have some internal production. We are very careful with the fertilizers and the blends we use. We have a good legislation. We have a good control. And so this was part of the situation. We are one of the challenges we have is that we import 80% of the fertilizer comes from Canada, Russia, Germany, Israel, and so we are very dependent on fertilizers. And we have novel fertilizers, new fertilizers. There are many possibilities. I have a talk on this, but it's not time here today. What I want to tell you, very importantly, is the company, the industry can come and say, I have a very good product for you. It works very well. You see, and tells you the principles and everything. But at the end of the day, no matter what, plants should have the final say. They can explain all the principles for you, but the plants need to say, I like it. I respond to it. The yield increase is economical. And so then it's okay to use, okay? And believe me, there are a lot of snake oils there. And now, the other thing we did, Jenny, was a good program on new varieties. This was probably the most important thing. When farmers went from the south and southeast to the Midwest, first thing they did, they established local, practical research foundations, agronomic foundations. Goal number one, breeding programs. We need to adapt to this region. This was just essential. And nowadays, we can produce wheat, very good yield in the tropical conditions, believe it or not. So the expansion, again, to the savanna had a lot to do with breeding programs. Now, very important, no-till, as I said before, because if you do it right, because let's differentiate between no-till done properly and no-till that is really by the concept, no, people call no-till, but it doesn't follow the principles, it's not good procedure. But if you do it properly, you can increase organic matter in the topsoil, you have better soil profile, you have better soil physical properties. And I want to spend some time talking with you about crop rotation, okay? This was a topic yesterday. Is the lady here that talked about, Ryan is here, right? The last one? Okay. Oh, okay, all right. But he talked about crop rotation in potato. So this is so important. Here is some maize and intercropped with brachiaria, which is a grass that we have. Excellent results. Here is very interesting, a study done by my friend Crucial, showing that by crop rotation with palisade grass, you have more phosphorus available down in the soil profile. This is another, there are several, I'm just saying two of them, but this is a former PhD student of mine, Silvino, very great student, and he just published this year, Circular Agriculture Practices Enhances Phosphorus Recovery for Large-Scale Commercial Farms Under Tropical Conditions. So there are many more results showing crop rotation, you have a lot of advantages. Now, this one is very emblematic. This study is very serious, very practical, and it shows what was the recovery of phosphorus in 22 years. And here is rate of P2O5, and here is the recovery. How much the plants recover from what was applied by annual crops or annual crops plus crop rotation and grasses. You can see 44, and here is 85% recovery as related to 44 when you do the right crop rotation, okay? Well, I wanted to, how much time I have, Mr. Chairman, please? 7 or 8 minutes. Okay, all right. You're doing good. Okay, all right, thank you. And I want to tell you, I presented this years ago. It's a friend of mine that has a farm in Lucas do Rio Verde, José Eduardo, nicknamed Zecão, in Mato Grosso. And it's just wonderful. He's an agronomist, very talented. But monocropping or double crop led his farm. He was really going into bankruptcy in the 90s because of monocropping. And then, of course, I have many more slides about this, but I am summarizing. He put together systems of crop rotation in 4 years. Okay, I don't have time to go into detail. But he uses like maize plus crotalaria. He uses maize plus rusesiensis. He uses, in some parts of the farm every year, a pupurri of different families, like here, crotalaria ocroleica, expectably sunflower, millet, and turnip. And he does real no-till. You can see here, this is from his farm. Look at his soil and the mulch that he has on top of the soil. And here, my friends, this was his soil, oxysol, before he started the crop rotation, and now. Is there a difference? So I went to his farm many times, but the most important thing comes now, because I told you the plants have a say. You can do all of this, but at the end of the day, farmers need economic situation and profit, right? So let me show you this study here. It's done. Many farmers in the country send the results, the data, to this institution, and they put everything together, and then they say, okay, here is a trend for low profit. Here is a trend for high profit. Here's the average profit for soybean. And here is his farm. Okay, you see these dots here? So, he's above the high doing the crop rotation he's doing. And the system. I tell you what, Jamie, if one day you can go to Brazil and visit this farm and take some farmers there, you will be very impressed. Very impressed. No matter what, plants should have a final say. And finally, we have to have a good program on educating the farmer community on how to use nutrients wisely. Because you can produce a lot of data, but you have to spread the news around, right? So, some highlights from my talk with agronomists, very quickly. Thanks again, Tom, Andre, and Jenny. You have generally high soil pH. Be careful with micronutrients. Intensive agriculture may lower soil pH with time. Be careful with OSA methodology. I already talked about that. You have generally high cation exchange capacity, high capacity to absorb cations, high buffer capacity. So in the future, if you need to lime, you will need high amounts of lime. fertilizers are broadcasted at soil surface. And here I want to give you a piece of advice too. Be careful, because if you don't have phosphorus down in the soil profile, the roots are shallow. And if they are shallow and you don't have water, it may be a problem. Oh, sorry. Most limiting nutrient is phosphorus. That's what they told me. Very complex reaction. Many alternatives to improve PU's efficiency. I have a speech on that. There's no silver bullet. Also, I was impressed that only about 25, some said 25, some said 50, so it's in this range. Test their soils. Many times do not do it right. That's what they told me. So this is of concern. Boron deficiency is becoming an issue. Remember the Liebig's law of the minimum, right? The yield is limited by the most limiting factor. And just, this is not so important, but as you grow canola is a very good crop to use phosphate rock. I'm a specialist on phosphate rock. It's lower cost. And it doesn't matter the soil is high pH, canola can go and use phosphate rock efficiently. Now, the last one before the final thoughts. I asked the question to Dan, what can I cover? Something at the end that you say, this is really important for us. And Daniel said, by the way, Daniel, I forgot to recognize you too, but you were in the package with your father, okay? But I'm recognizing you now because he was in the call. So he said, climate is very key. Temperature has been rising. We have lower amount of rains. What to do? So this may bring opportunities too, right? Because if you have higher temperature for a longer time, maybe you can take advantage in some situations. You can expect more pressure from weeds, pests, and diseases, so you will need to have more attention, better management. And some suggestions that come to mind related to how to minimize this issue is to develop new varieties, crop rotation, very important, and more roots, meaning amelioration if the case of soil physical properties. Be careful with P only broadcasted, and if in the future you have subsoil acidity, which seems unlikely, you can use phosphogypsum. Now, going from climate change from agricultural perspective to a more broad perspective, worldwide, what can you do? Do what you can to make the fossil fuel companies really collaborate to decrease their environmental impacts. They are indeed the major contributors to global warming and climate change. I suggest checking YouTube what the fossil fuel industry doesn't want you to know. 75% to 78% of the greenhouse gases come from the energy industry. And many want to blame agriculture, right? And we have our part. But if we don't resolve the problem of energy, we will not resolve the problem of global warming. I had 3 final thoughts, but I'm going to cut it short because I'm already out of time. I want to mention this from Paul Fixing, our former supervisor, Tom. And one time he said, it's not about doing things right, but instead it's about doing the right things right. And by listening to the speeches yesterday and by listening to the award you gave to Mr. John, who is John? Where's John? Is he here? Oh, John is here. I was very impressed, John. Congratulations. Many people here are doing the right things right. So I want to really congratulate you for that. You can spend your life doing things right, but they were not the things you should be doing. So you have to find what the right things and do it right. Well, I had other things, but I don't have time. So this is very nice, but I can tell you later, if you want, the value of knowledge. And with that, I just want to thank you very much for your attention. I don't know if we have time for questions. I'm sorry. Yeah, and yeah, I think.
Please.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi. As it turns out, I'm looking at farmland investment in Brazil, Mato Grosso area. Uh, One thing I've been told, well, you alluded to it, that your soils are virtually void of nutrients in some areas, plus the pH is way low. Now, how do your inputs compare to our inputs here, subsidies aside?
No, we have very low subsidies. You know, it is what it is. Compared to other countries, our subsidies are very low. But we have availability of lime, phosphogypsum, and many different fertilizers. We use a lot of single, triple, superphosphate, MAP. We have KCl. We have a lot of urea produced in the country. So the problem is not, you know, how to obtain. The problem is the price, as you know, because the price of fertilizer, but this is not in Brazil. This is everywhere, right? We are price takers, but you will not have a problem with availability. And one additional things, depending on the farm you're going to buy, they have been using and farming for so long that the soil fertility now is not so bad because they have been using fertilizer and phosphorus for a long time. So
Now, my other question to you is, of course, with Russian gas being cut off, Germany is producing far less fertilizers. Russian sanctions are in place. Do you have the availability of fertilizers, other than Canadian, of course?
well, this is a big concern, I have to tell you, because 80% of our fertilizer come from other countries. And so, in fact, when the war started between Russia and Ukraine, our president went to Russia because we receive a lot of their fertilizer inputs from Russia. And so this is a big deal for us. What Brazil is doing now, and I'm part of this team, we are putting together a center of fertilizer, national center, and to produce our own fertilizer, increase the percentage we produce in the country and use it even more efficiently. And so, but it still is a concern.
But do you have any idea as to the price comparison for the inputs per acre on a per acre basis?
Compared to what, you mean?
To the Canadian
It's,
farmland?
well, as you know, fertilizers are a commodity, so we follow the international prices converted to Brazil. Of course, there is the logistics of transportation, so it's a little higher, of course. But, you know, let me tell you one piece of data may be interesting. For regular grain crops, fertilizer accounts for 25 to 30% of the total cost. So it's pretty
Thank you.
big. Thank you.
I got kind of a follow-up there. On the one slide you presented where you were showing the rotational studies, you were looking at, I think it was the phos rates, where it was kind of showing the percent recovery. And you had up to 800 kgs per hectare of P, I don't know if it's P or phos going down. So that's kind of what he was asking maybe is like, what is a rate, a typical rate a farmer might use? We're putting, 20 to 50 kgs a hectare down
Right.
for a wheat crop, depending on the
Right.
growing conditions. So what would you be putting down in Brazil?
That's right. That's a good question. Thank you for that. No, that experiment, they had several purposes, and that's why they used huge amounts of phosphorus. But regularly, we use between 60, 80 kilos of P2O5 per hectare, okay? So it's higher than what you use because of our soils. Many farms now, because they have been using phosphorus for a long time, you can decrease the amount, but it still use much more phosphorus than you do, of course. No, that's an interesting question. If we broadcast or we furrow or we apply in furrow, we use it to apply in furrow a lot because we minimize the problem of fixation. But nowadays, so large farms and the operation is much faster broadcasting, they are changing to broadcasting. And so it's kind of half and half. And there are many things to discuss there. We can talk later.
How would you say the success you spoke of your co-ops who are doing the research, how could we copy that in Canada? What would you say the success pieces are?
Well, I think the big success of this co-ops and the farmers in the center of Brazil is that they establish the research centers to study very practical information. Because in the university, let me tell you something, just between between us here, it's not going out of this room, right? I was a university professor. Then I was IP&I director. Now I own my private consulting company. So I had different roles. As a university professor, you have to publish papers, right? That's number one priority. To publish papers, many times you are not so connected to the reality of the farm. Okay, you are doing very specific things. And many research, well, I'm not sure I should say this, but I will anyway. They don't have a good connection to the field. And so they are publishing, they are very good, but no connection. Now, these people, the farmers, were very smart, and they said, we don't want to publish papers. We want you to solve the problems we have here. And that's so essential.
You're saying that you're growing 2 to 3 crops now, but you also had charts up there where each crop has a different liming preference for its growth. So are you doing soil tests before each crop production, or are you doing removal rates and then one soil test a year to correct for any adjustments that need
Right.
to be done?
Very good question, too. Excellent questions. No, you know, when you do the crop rotation, you try to understand what is the one that will need the highest base saturation, and you apply based on that. Liming is something you do every 3 to 5 years. You don't do every year, right? And the other crops, if they have a requirement for lower base saturation, it doesn't mean that the higher base saturation will damage the yield. It's just that for that specific one, you don't need to go to 60, you can go to 40, but because you have maize in the rotation, you go to 60, and that crop will still do fine, no problem. So I tell you what, Brazil in terms of liming has probably the best set of informations in the world. If your soils get really acidic, there are very good people there that can make a shortcut in terms of liming and things like that. Well, guys, I will be around, okay? So come, talk, it's a pleasure, okay? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And don't worry.